On this computer. Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Actually, it's the afternoon. From wherever you may be listening from all over the world, this is Rebecca Lee at Maybe It's Mercury, teaching people how to detox heavy metals without getting hurt. And today I'm talking to Kendy Radatsky. Kendy is a functional nutritional therapist. She is chelating at the moment, and she's chelating her son too. She's on her 163rd round with Andy Cutler Chelation, and her son, who is 14 now, has been chelating since he was 11. And I think that people are going to find that really, really interesting that you and your son are both chelating. So I usually start off by asking, what was the matter? What was going on that brought you here to chelating?
My health struggles began when I was 25, so I'm 49 now.
Right. Okay.
And I was very active in physically. I was a surfer and a competitive swimmer and active in the community, active in academia and my work, and everything kind of crashed down with what felt like the flu that didn't go away. And it took about 2 years to crawl out of the depth of that hole and start to find a little bit of my feet under me. But for a good number of years, several decades, I really didn't know what was going on. There were a lot of labels put on it. But I was having all sorts of neurological issues, nothing that was ever really diagnosed in that front. But I definitely had Lyme disease, at least at one point. Fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue were labels that were placed as well, but with not a lot of, hope or support. And so, yeah, at the time of when I began chelating, I was looking back over my list of the things that were uncomfortable or going wrong, and they had been that way for a long time. So I had gotten kind of used to them.
Used to them.
Um, yeah, to some degree. I talked about this on the forum with someone a year or so ago. Some of us develop with real long issues like this that don't really have an answer. Kind of this intense patience that like there was also always the seeking, but there was sort of this like just okay, this is what I'm dealing with, and let's just be patient with it. And
Those,
so that's kind of what I mean by got used to it. But none of the things were felt right or balanced or comfortable. And many of the things, like, I mean, I had issues with a lot of pain and tension in my fascial system. My skin has been exceptionally dry and it would crack and break apart at times. My adrenals were so tanked that I would have like one big stressor and just be out for, a week or two at a time.
mm,
Big depression, tons of brain fog and memory issues. Liver was super overloaded. Um, and my hormones had been tanked for decades too. So all of my sex hormones, and I never was diagnosed as hypothyroid, but I think I was probably functionally hypothyroid for at least a while, certainly after the birth of my son.
how do you think you got exposed? What do you think was your biggest exposure, given that this is,
That's one of the first questions that everybody always asks me when I describe this process I'm
yeah.
doing, and I don't know. I've never had any mercury amalgam fillings.
Oh,
I wasn't a big fish eater when I was young, or even as an adult. I have it sometimes, but so I suspect that process of elimination, probably from my mom from placental transfer and possibly vaccinations, childhood vaccinations, and or I had a few vaccinations before travel as a young adult. And I haven't been able to piece together because I wasn't really note taking very clearly about my symptoms at that time. But I wonder if because there were definitely some downturns in my young adult life that may have been linked to some of those.
You know what it sounds like to me? Almost like, I sometimes talk about people who are going along, in their bodies managing everything, and then there's a stressful event, and that just pitches them into dysfunction. It almost sounds as though you got a virus that pitched you over the
Mhm.
edge.
Yep, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I look back, there were a few times when there was probably a big wobble, in my health, but nothing that ever was cohesively understood until that breaking point. Yeah.
So how did you decide that this was Mercury?
Right. So I had, like I said, I was in a long health journey for, several decades, seeing lots of new different kinds of practitioners that I had never known before. When I was young, didn't grow up with any of that. And once or twice, probably two or three times, I had different practitioners. One I remember was a craniosacral kind of osteopath, and one was some kind of energy worker, totally separate from each other, separate in time, would say something like, well, I've only ever seen this pattern of what I'm feeling in your body with someone with Lyme disease or Mercury. And usually I would say, well, yeah, I have Lyme disease, so that's probably that, and just kind of let it go. And I had tried treating Lyme disease in all the ways, conventional and alternative, and finally had just sort of made a decision to disidentify from it because I knew that I was holding on to it too tightly, and that did help. So at that point, when I was hearing these things from these practitioners, I was just thinking, well, it's not anything I can really change. But at one point, somebody sort of said the same kind of thing, and it coincided in time with so the oh my goodness. And the Price Foundation, right? So I've been a member of,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I just blanked there for a minute. Been a
It's
member
that.
for a while and had received my quarterly journal. And I don't remember how many years ago it was, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, there was that one whole journal that was dedicated to Mercury.
Was that the one that had my article in it? I wrote an article for them.
Probably. It's where I discovered all of this and all of you guys.
And
And
the light went off. Bing.
yeah, it was amazing. And what really kind of clinched it for me was I had been wondering about it for a few years because as a nutritional therapist, I have access to a lot of testing and more information than a lot of people do, but I had never come across a way to test or a way to treat that I felt confident in, that I felt good about. And
Right,
so I just sort of never really considered the issue because I didn't feel good about the solution or the results that I would get. But when everything was laid out for me with the ACC, I just said, well, this is what I need to do. And I didn't know for sure until I did the first test round, which I was able to do very quickly because I've never had fillings.
right.
I
Did you
did
do a
just in case I had the brain fog and like maybe had one and didn't remember. I'd still got my x-rays done and checked by the group. But
a-
yeah, it was that first round that really convinced me.
what happened the first round?
Gosh, I have my notes right here. I know I was really nervous. And so there were a lot of complications, surely, with, not sleeping and all the things. But I remember feeling really disoriented. I had a really strange feeling in my head. I
Hmm.
started at 5 milligrams, even though I was pretty functional. I went maybe lower than I needed to, but
Had a reaction at
um,
5 though, huh?
I did. Yeah, yeah. And it wasn't intense, but it was clear. And so then the next round I went up to 7.5. Next round I went up to 10. And then I found my way to 12 pretty soon thereafter and stayed there for quite a while.
Do you, in retrospect, do you think you really had Lyme disease? Did you have, I mean, I was just reading the file about it. Like Andy said you have to have had a bite and place where it's endemic and not a super duper lab to tell you that too. So you did have Lyme on top of it?
I'm pretty sure I did. I was working, doing habitat restoration work. So I was crawling around in the bushes all the time. And, it was in Southern California. And at the time, the doctors there were saying it's not here, it's not possible. But I ended up connecting with the brother of a friend of mine who became a doctor, a Lyme literate doctor, because he had Lyme. And he was the one who said that's not true. It absolutely is here. It's just not as prevalent. And I went through it turns out his parents are the ones who created IGeneX Lab, which is kind of the one for those who are in that circle, the one that is the most reliable to determine it. So yeah.
Okay, well, so then how did you discover what did you do? Did you get Andy's book? That was before my book was written, right?
I think it was right around the time, because it was 2020. I don't remember when the manual came out.
It's 2017 because it was, yeah, 2016 or
Yeah,
something.
okay. So it was available. Yeah. So I don't know. I think I first just connected on the Facebook group and kind of, began to do things just based on everything that was available there, but pretty quickly got the book and made sure I felt really up on everything. And I have really appreciated the succinct presentation of that manual. But I also have the other two, which I poured over and made a million notes in because I'm just that kind of person, right? I'm always wanting to understand the physiology of everything.
Well, you have the background in that, so maybe it was easier for you to understand than some people because
Yeah,
fungal illness is quite a
it's a
read.
thing. Yes.
Yeah. So so now you've done about 100 and something rounds, so that's about 2 years worth, huh?
Well,
What
I've actually been here. Let me get my book and just see.
150 you said? What did you
I
say?
have taken a number of breaks. Yeah, I just
Okay.
finished 162 or no, 163.
That's
Um,
years.
yeah, when I first started off, I was doing them weekly, but it was right when COVID started. And so then, of course, I got sick a few times. And so took nice long breaks for that. And I would take breaks over Christmas holidays when we'd go visit people, little breaks. But then also a couple of summers I took off almost completely because of some personal, like my husband and I were splitting up, right? So like I felt that I couldn't handle the stress of that plus this.
Yeah.
So it's taken me, almost like 4.5 years to get to this point. Um,
And
but yeah.
what's changed? What can you say?
Oh, um, I tried to do an update report 6 or 8 months ago on the Facebook group and wasn't even able to come up with a lot of really clear, distinct things. There are so many things. Let me see if I can just come up with some things. I do sometimes still take naps during the day, but I had to take naps almost every day. It was like a requirement of my body, and sometimes it would be several hours. So now I have much more sustained energy.
Mm.
My ability the one thing I remember reporting on the Facebook group is I have access to joy now in a way that I did not have for decades and decades.
That's a big thing.
That's huge, huge. And it's not that I'm always running around like super joyful. I feel big emotions. So depression was a big, big piece of what I was
So you were
coming
depressed
to
a
this
lot.
with.
Yeah.
And I still have tendencies to go very deep in all the directions, but I have so much more ability to sort of have perspective around it and kind of find my way through it and feel the gratitude inside of it all. And my skin is way, way better. I've determined that most of my skin issues were probably candida related, so I am still dealing with that. But I have, ways to manage it and it's much less of a problem than it used to be, even when I first started managing that. My gut is way, way better.
I hear
I
gut candida,
run.
I think lead right away. Did you ever have any exposure to lead?
No, not that showed up on my test or that I know of in my history, but um I just yeah, I don't know. My gut, I remember going and getting, I can run functional gut tests, but I also went to somebody to have a similar test done and He said he had never seen one so bad. I mean, I had parasites, I had fungi, I had the bacterial overload, I had insufficiency of the good guys, right? The beneficial bacteria, all the things. And what I found was everything I knew, which I had been trained to do to help heal those things, wasn't working.
Yeah, it doesn't
And
stick.
the same thing with my hormones. So I also have been through training to help balance hormones. And I was trying all the things. My hormones are all just super low level, and none of them were responding either at all, or they would respond kind of oppositely and do really strange things. So,
Your hormone producing glands were poisoned.
right? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that is beginning to improve as well. Yeah. Yeah. So.
I think one really interesting aspect of your story is the fact that you've been chelating, your son's been chelating. Can you want to say something about that? I think there's a lot of parents out there that would be curious about that.
Right. When I first started my own journey, and I started reading a lot about it, about Mercury, I started to maybe recognize some of the subtler symptoms in him. It was tricky to discern because it was also the beginning of COVID lockdown time. And so a lot of the sort of emotional and kind of brain related stuff and personality related stuff could have also been coming from that. So I
Yeah.
gave it some time. And then also I gave it some time before I decided to test him. I tested him a little bit more than a year after I tested myself.
Hair
I just
test.
didn't feel like I was ready emotionally or logistically to take on the role of being his caregiver through that chelation process because it is a lot.
Yeah. Get
But
up at
also
night.
emotionally, I wasn't ready to
Tested.
hear that he
When you say
had
tested, you mean you gave him a trial round or a hair test?
just the hair test even.
Oh, okay. How did
I
that
just
go?
didn't even want to know. I kind of didn't want to know.
Right. Yeah.
I was afraid.
What
Yeah.
did the hair test show?
He actually is excreting, well, at the time was excreting a lot of mercury, and met one counting rule. So, but
Really?
mine was a screaming mercury test of like I met three of the counting rules.
Yeah.
Um,
But Andy told me
so
it didn't matter. You just have to beat one. It doesn't mean
no,
like
exactly.
three or
It's just
four of them doesn't really just
no, it just means it's maybe like that much more of a percentage likelihood as far as I
right,
understand it.
right.
But
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
not that it's any worse. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I did find out about him, and it really, it was complicated. I know I've heard a lot on the Facebook group too from people wondering about how much support their partners are giving them or other people's partners, and that's been a challenge. That was a challenge for us too. We're now split up, my husband and I, but that was probably a small piece of it. Was sort of he never quite all the way bought in to everything that I was doing and why. And especially when it extended to my son, it got a little bit extra wonky there. And then there was kind of like he did start to see a lot of the improvements in me, and I think understood it a lot more, but wasn't quite able to fully rally for as long as it takes to be there as a support person. So he got really fatigued with kind of being patient and waiting for the real me to come back out.
It's hard
Um,
to live with someone who's chronically ill
yeah,
and give
yeah.
our partners, admit that that's true. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I get it from his end. Yeah. We've split up in a really beautiful, good way, but
Oh,
um,
glad to hear that.
but it's still just that there was definitely tension there. Yeah.
Well, that's a sad thing to have happen. Yeah, it is. But
Yeah, but it wasn't just over this either. So there were other reasons. But what's interesting that I've also heard, and this sort of when I was speaking to, having more access to joy and having more access to just everything that this being is that was sort of just turned off for so long, then I've been awakening to this kind of like, this is who I want to be, and this is who I already am. And some of these things aren't as compatible with the way that I've been operating for a long time. So that does change relationships.
that's a long, you've got a whole lifetime of habits, working around, your psyche and your body working around this toxicity. And then when it starts to go, I mean, necessarily those are going to be big changes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, the fatigue, like the having more energy, having more clarity of thought, and then also kind of just the neurological pieces. I was often sort of sidelined for like a day or so at a time, very randomly before this or in the beginning of chelation in ways that were really scary too. So I've started to have so much more trust in my body now, that I, can understand a little bit more about what's happening and where it's coming from.
What's changed in your son? You told me that he realizes the importance of doing it and wants to keep going. I think
Yeah.
I've heard that a lot from teenagers, about teenagers, that they realize, hey, this is I have to do this, even though it's
Yeah.
pain. So what's
Yeah.
with him?
Well, he's very neurotypical. So, when I was reading and investing a lot of time in the support group, the Facebook group that supports parents who are chelating children, a lot of parents come to this for their children who are really, really affected, right? And nonverbal and all sorts of things. And then there are some of us who don't tend to speak as much with more neurotypical kids. So, but the things that I've seen that have improved for him, he has less fatigue for sure. He's much more capable physically. He's in, he does tennis and he skis and he did those things sort of before, but he wouldn't have the stamina to complete them for very long. Um, and part of it too, we started when he was 11 and during the lockdowns, and he's 14 now. So part of it is sort of an age appropriate change. So it's a little hard to discern, but I'm seeing a lot more emotional stability, a lot fewer episodes of negative spiral thinking, which he was really having a lot of.
Watch out for that.
Um, Sorry?
Got to watch out for that.
I know, right? Yeah, yeah. And same with sort of depression and joy. His skin has improved dramatically. He had eczema almost all over his body for his first few years of life.
Oh, yeah.
And when we started chelating, it improved a little bit and then got, kind of worse. Certain things will worsen as we begin the process of chelation. But then just recently, we're kind of noticing that it's only been on his arms the last few years. And even that is like hardly there anymore. He still has a pretty narrow diet. But he understands, and he says, I wish I could want more things and I wish I could like more things. And my sense is that we just need to get through the chelation and then work with his gut and get things rebalanced. But he's very drawn to, we get all the highest quality, everything we can, but he's really drawn to dairy and sourdough, and then he has eggs every morning, which are wonderful food, but he literally has mostly the same thing every breakfast and lunch, and then I try to vary dinner. So that's still present,
He's not
but his
mild.
awareness of it is really different.
So he does well on the eggs and the sourdough bread and stuff. Dairy.
Yeah.
So maybe he needs thiols.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, that's very possible. But he also, wants ice cream he has ice cream every day. Because at this point, I'm not having any food, any
Sounds like
food
me.
arguments with him. Growing up with a nutritional therapist as a mom is a little bit tricky.
So with the people you have as clients, I bet you see a lot of people that need to chelate. You
Yeah,
know,
the way I approach it is because I don't like to just throw a bunch of tests at people when they first come to me. I like to spend some time with them and work on the foundations and, figure out their diet. But usually I'll do some gut work with most people first. And what I tend to notice is the people who don't respond, as I kind of explained what happened to me and what I think is happening to him, they don't respond the way I would expect, or they've had this complex, like mysterious, really long history. Then I bring the hair testing forward much sooner. And yeah, I've had probably 6 or 7 people test as likely to need chelation. but many of them have gotten stalled at different places, right? So like older people who have mouthful of amalgams and just don't have the money or don't feel like they really have the energy in themselves anymore to move through that phase. Or I had one woman who was had just given birth and was going to breastfeed for the next few years. So
Yeah.
I expect to hear from her soon, hopefully, because she was definitely convinced.
Okay. I mean, I see so many people. It takes, I don't know what it takes to buy into this. You know,
I don't know. I know I have one friend, really good friend who's I think she's about 75 or so, and sh her test showed not only clear mercury but a lot of aluminum. And she's got really big challenges with she's really worried about dementia, and she's got a lot of memory issues already. And she's also got osteoporosis pretty bad. And I'm just trying to, I explain it to all to her, and she feels compelled. But then the next day, she's sort of forgotten the importance of it and doesn't understand how to prioritize it.
yeah, you need to be, it's like, other conditions and so forth, there's constant information about it. And so it sinks in, but this,
Yeah.
we're sort of in the in obscurity.
I know. And me being a friend, I don't want to bring it up every time we see each other. Even though part of me sees these things and sees her worries and sees the connections and wants to just bring it up again so that I can help her walk through it. I also just don't want to overwhelm her with it and have it dominate our friendship.
My daughter told me that I was getting early onset dementia, and I'm 76. So that I mean, chelating put paid to that. And I
Hmm.
still have like trouble finding words and things like that sometimes, especially if I get
Hmm.
tired. And
Yeah.
I'm not checking out like my brother, my mother, my aunt, everybody else in my family got dementia.
You're doing something about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I had
Yeah.
it off. Yeah. Well, is there something else you'd like to talk about? I can't think of any questions for you. What's important
Oh,
to you about
yeah.
getting
One
out?
thing that I mean, I just want to state my appreciation again for for all of you who have, been there to sort of continue to usher all of this through the information and also the support. And I've learned so many things in rereading the books and then, being on the Facebook group. And one thing that I wanted to bring up for people to just kind of magnify, and this is certainly not true for everyone because we're all bio individuals, but I have had a lot of struggles around iron in my body, in my blood. And I was doing a training to learn how to run blood chemistry work for my clients. And my blood work came back and my iron levels were super high. And I really it wasn't just the ferritin, but the blood levels. And I did as much learning around it as I could. And anyway, I don't need to go into the whole story, but
Is that
it,
hemochromatosis?
well, that's what I suspected at first. But then very quickly, I just went in for I just decided I've never donated blood in my life before because I've always had this feeling like I'm anemic or I am anemic, depending on the blood work. But I went and donated blood and crashed after that. So I think I don't know if maybe the numbers were wrong, incorrect from the lab in that, instant, or what I think is more true is my body is changing things a lot in response to where I am in chelation or just I don't know what. But ever since then, I've had challenges with really extremely low iron to the point where my naturopathic physician suggested she said, I usually, really encourage people with foods and with supplements, but you need to go get an iron infusion because you are in desperate need. And I did,
Right.
and I had a horrible reaction of toxicity to it. It
Wow.
was as if someone was putting, 20 times the amount of iron that they should have in my body when it was just the beginning of 5 infusions.
Did you
Um,
stop there?
I stopped there. Absolutely. I was in bed for 5 days.
Oh, well, you know what Andy said about the iron. He said that, yeah, that it's
Yes, the body can
oxidative and your
often,
body's keeping it low for,
yes,
yeah.
exactly. And even my naturopathic physician, who's pretty up, she's not up on this protocol specifically, but she's done some trainings in chelation and she understands a lot of things and she works a lot with herbs and she's just a very smart cookie. She still doesn't quite know to think about this pattern that Andy,
So
but
weird
it's exactly what's
paradoxical
happening in
reaction.
my body.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
like here I got this infusion that's supposed to, and there's data that says like with each certain amount of iron we put into your blood, your ferritin should go up about this much, and mine didn't. And
Yeah,
then
body pushing,
within
keep
6 months,
pushing it.
my
Yeah.
ferritin's back down in the basement again. My body is clearly dumping it for some reason.
It's funny because he had the same theory about vitamin D.
Yes, I also don't take vitamin D because I've found that it's challenging for me. So it's an
Apparently,
interesting one.
he postulated that their body pushes it down for a reason. I don't know it's what that reason could be. Perhaps you do. But some
Yeah,
people,
I mean, I'm not sure. I do know that there's this way in our medical culture, especially since like COVID, when there was this relationship clearly seen of so many of the people that get really sick with COVID have really low vitamin D. But then there's an assumption that we should all take lots of vitamin D and make sure it's up. But one of the things that wasn't really discussed is that when we get very sick, it uses up our vitamin D. And so I think I see it as a correlation, not a causation. I see it, or maybe even
yeah,
a causation in the other direction.
I
And
also,
pumping a bunch of vitamin D back in isn't necessarily the answer.
but that is just the universal opinion
Right.
across the board. One thing I've
Right.
noticed, since I've started re listening to all these doctors on Substack who had the insight, about COVID, uh,
Yeah.
they're awfully gullible.
Mm.
I
How do
mean,
you?
they'll get some bee in their bonnet about some remedy, and they'll just think it's this is what's going to cure everybody. It's wonderful. It's suppressed by the FDA, and it's terrible, and then they go on about this thing, and yeah, it's and you have to be able to differentiate between science and marketing. And a lot of these products are just marketing that they've heard. I mean, Andy always said that the medical schools look for liberal arts majors to become MDs.
Huh.
And he and other technical people are horrified at how non-technical MDs are. Yeah.
You know,
Science.
I don't know what my opinion is about that because I don't know, enough of them. But what I do recognize, what I so appreciate about my training, which, my initial training was a year long. I don't try to compare myself to NDs or MDs. And I've done some advanced training since then, but one thing that we get as nutritional therapists is this baseline approach of bioindividuality is the key,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Well, you
And
certainly
that
learn that when you're dealing with Mercury.
yes, right? And everybody's on the post saying, well, this happens to me. And if I take this at night, I can't sleep. And but I have to take this or I can't sleep. And everybody's so different. But I've used that as a baseline for myself to keep myself from making generalizations for people. Yeah. And I feel like it saves me from jumping into that pool that you're describing. But it also sometimes does make it a little bit more challenging because I don't ever make any assumptions. So then it's like we have to kind of slowly find our way through everything.
Each person being so individual, yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But that's something I appreciate so much about this protocol, the ACC, is that there are some general definitely no's and definitely yeses. And then there's so much, again,
The
such
rest
an
is the
acknowledgement of bioindividuality and the way that you guys put together the manual. It's like, okay, something's probably going to go wrong at some point with this system and this system and this system and this system. And here's all these choices, and you should just try them.
Yeah, try them and see
See
what
what works.
happens. That's what I go with because you have
Yeah.
just no idea. And it's the same with the chelation. Like some people have to start at, like 2 milligrams, and some people can handle 50, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then they
Mm-hmm.
ask me, well, where should I have no idea? So like, I don't know where to
Yeah.
start. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So just so, so grateful. And for the clients that I've worked with that have wanted to go the route of chelation, I'm so grateful that I don't have to be an expert in it. I can just introduce them to it, give them the books, right? And give them the Facebook group and
Yeah.
continue to support them with the nutrition and with the lifestyle pieces, but allow them to take the reins, which is just such a
Yeah.
wonderful way to do healthcare.
Yeah, you're on your own with this thing. You have to take responsibility and do it. It takes a long time, takes a lot of patience and a lot of faith
Yes,
to do it.
yes.
And yeah, I don't
But
know.
ultimately, that's the way we need to be doing everything in our health. I mean, other than like, broken leg or, something really acute and massive, so many people need to be learning this lesson of taking responsibility for their own health decisions.
Yes. Well, that
Yeah.
sounds like a very good point to leave leave this
Yeah.
discussion on. But I'm going to ask you before we go. Uh, would you like to say something about your website or how people can contact you if they're interested in that, in what you do?
Sure, yeah. Yeah. I am it's my practice is called What Feeds Me Nutritional Therapy because
What feeds me,
yeah, what
right?
feeds me, right? So it's like, yes, the nutrition, but so much more than that. What is it that's nourishing us? And so my website is what feeds me wellness.com.
Whatfeedsmewellness.com.
Yeah, yeah. And I work with people remotely and as well as here in Boise where I live.
Yes. Well, the remote thing is pretty wonderful. Well,
Yeah,
thank you very much, Kendi, and
yeah.
yeah, thank you
Thank you
so
for
much
your
for listening to
for your
this.
interest, Rebecca. I appreciate being able to tell a little bit of my story and help some people, hopefully.
I hope a lot of people hear it and a lot of people get helped. Yeah.